Hey everyone, and welcome to Mod Monday. This is your host, the Pixel Pirate, and today we are playing a mod for Half-Life 2 called the Stanley Parable. So this is the first time I've loaded it up. Just going to set up my keyboard quickly. Like I said, I never played this game before, and apparently it's pretty old, but comes highly recommended. So let's see how it goes.
This is the story of a man named Stanley. Stanley worked for a company in a big building where he was employee number 427. Employee number 427's job was simple. He sat at his desk in room 427 and he pushed buttons on a keyboard. Orders came to him through a monitor next to his desk, telling him what buttons to push, how long to push them, and in what order.
That's one big monitor.
This is what employee 427 did every day of every month of every year. And although others might have considered it soul-rending, Stanley relished every moment that the orders came in, as though he had been made exactly for this job. And Stanley was happy.
Not for long.
And then one day something very peculiar happened. Something that would forever change Stanley. Something he would never quite forget. He had been at his desk for nearly an hour when he realized that not one single order had arrived on a monitor for him to follow. No one had showed up to give him instructions, call a meeting, or even say hi. Never in all his years at the company had this happened, this complete isolation. Something was very clearly wrong. Shocked, frozen solid, Stanley found himself unable to move for the longest time. But as he came to his wits and regained his senses, he got up from his desk and walked out into the hallway.
That's where I come in.
Stanley decided to go to the staff lounge to check on his co-workers. He never functioned well by himself and constantly needed support and guidance from others, so the thought of total solitude was terrifying to him.
Okay, so I've got to find the staff lounge, I guess.
When Stanley came to a set of two open doors, he entered the door on his left.
Okay.
As Stanley entered the lounge, he was horrified to find not a single person here. He decided he would walk up to see his boss, hoping that he would find an answer there.
Pretty linear so far. That's alright, still interesting.
Coming to a staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office. Entering his manager's office, Stanley was once again stunned to discover not an indication of any human life. It was at this point that he began to feel dizzy and a little sick, and even thought he might pass out when suddenly he noticed a keypad next to the filing cabinet in the corner of his boss's office. Stanley had never seen this panel before and had no idea what combination of numbers would produce any result. In fact, only Stanley's boss knew this, since the panel withheld access to the boss's greatest, darkest secret, and so he had assigned the keypad a combination that only he could possibly know. The number of his freshman dorm number in college, 1957. But of course, Stanley couldn't possibly have known this.
So 1957.
Yet incredibly, By simply pushing random buttons on the keypad, Stanley
That's
happened to input the correct code by sheer luck. Amazing. Stanley
Amazing
ventured
indeed.
forth into the newly opened passageway.
Spooky.
As he drew deeper into the bowels of the building, Stanley had no idea where he was or what this place held. And just as he began to think he might not discover a thing, he emerged into a long room to find rows and rows of monitors, screens with a number above it. Stanley noticed, however, that these were not random numbers, but the number of employees who worked in the building, his co-workers. Even his own number, 427, had a place on the wall. But why a setup so elaborate, he asked. Was this simple surveillance, or something even more? And as if in answer to his question, the wall slid open before him, revealing the ultimate truth of the situation. An enormous control panel, Stanley discovered, but not one that controlled simple machinery. Buttons were labeled with emotions. Happy, sad. Levers and knobs controlled actions. Walking, eating, doing work, or watching TV. Every input on this device monitored not the functions of a machine, but of a human being. And the reality began to sink in. Stanley, like so many other people, reduced to images on a monitor, had been under someone's control, always at the mercy of this machine. Could this have been the only reason employee number 427 was content with his boring job? That a machine had altered his emotions to accept it blindly? He began to feel an unbridled rage, and at the peak of his anger, something happened. A spark. Stanley looked up and saw the generator overhead, still providing some small amount of power to the machine, keeping it alive. And knowing that this generator was all that kept the controls running, Stanley moved to the ladder in the back of the room and began to climb towards the rafters.
Okay. I had an option to set a jump key, but it's not letting me jump
The
or
higher
duck.
Stanley
so-
climbed, the closer he felt to freedom, the further from enslavement.
Okay then.
Blackness, power gone, all alone. And then
Something. Oh. Okay. Open door. Right.
as he stepped through the door into the fresh outside air, a feeling of liberation rushed through Stanley's body. He had seen power, he had seen enslavement, and he had destroyed it. The underling was in control now. He had found his leading role. Stanley never discovered why everyone had gone missing, nor how and when he had come under the machine's control. But it didn't upset him terribly, because he knew that this was how things were meant to happen. All he felt was a delight unlike any he had ever known before. Never again would he follow someone else's orders without question. Never again would anyone tell Stanley where to go, what to do, or how to feel. No more bosses, no more instructions on a screen. Stanley decides for himself now. And he stepped out into the world, and he felt the cool breeze upon his skin, and Stanley was happy.
And apparently I'm flying. The end. Was that really it? No, that can't be it. That can't be the whole game. I'll just wait for a minute. I'm just wondering if I go a different way on the hallway or on the stairs, whether it's I'll just skip all of that.
Stanley decided to go to the staff lounge to check on his co-workers. He never functioned well by himself and constantly needed support and guidance from others, so the thought of total solitude was terrifying to him. When Stanley
so
came
I'm
to a
supposed
set
to go
of
through
two
the
open
left.
doors, he entered the door on his left.
I'm going to go through the right. See what
This
happens.
was not the correct way to the employee lounge, and Stanley knew it perfectly well. So he turned left at the first open door and walked back in the right direction.
No, keep going.
Stanley was so bad at following directions, it's incredible he wasn't fired years ago. Maybe this is why everyone had left. No one wanted to be around someone as bad at listening as him. And since he was walking into the middle of nowhere and thus ruining the entire story, Stanley decided that he would punish himself. So when he came to the elevator and the doors opened, he stepped inside and pushed the button to go up.
Okay. I'll go down.
Oh, Stanley. You know, you really aren't going anywhere, and I don't say that deceitfully. I truthfully mean that there isn't a story down here. The story was back up where I told you to go in the first place. Right now, you're just running around looking at empty halls. And frankly, that's perhaps even more infuriating for me. So why don't you throw me a bone, give me a chance, and just let me tell the story I want to tell,
No. Okay. What's down here then?
Now listen carefully. This is important. Stanley walked through the red door.
This game's funny.
Aha, perhaps you misunderstood. Stanley walked through the red door. I still don't think we're communicating properly. Stanley walked through the red door.
Oh, that's funny. Oh no.
Good, good. Now, if you don't mind, there's something I'd like to show you. But to do that, I think it would be best for us to start from the beginning. This is a very sad story about the death of a man named Stanley. Stanley worked for a company in a big building where he was employee number 427. His job pushing buttons demanded little of him, so there was not much of himself to give, and in this way, Stanley's job felt less and less like his every day. But if buttons need pushing one day, it means they'll need pushing the next and then the next. So without question or judgment, Stanley continued to do what the screen told him. One keystroke flowed into another keystroke, flowed into his ride home, flowed into dinner, flowed into waking up, flowed into going to work, and here he was again.
Okay, I'm pressing the
Stanley
button,
was
but I've got
typing
no
out a
idea
complete
what's
sentence
anything-
that said
if
absolutely
anything's
nothing at
happening.
all. If in reality no one ever actually disappeared from the office, and Stanley never got the opportunity to make a decision, to choose which path he wanted to take, would his life still have any meaning? Perhaps when we long for something deeply enough, these hopes and fantasies become so strong in our minds that we truly believe that we're there, controlling that person and living that adventure. To manipulate your own thoughts and emotions might mean freedom from a self-imposed prison, but these delusions can be fatal to those who can't tell the difference. And so, Stanley asked, if that door never opened, if I'll never be able to walk away from those people and from these buttons, is this life still worth experiencing? Am I actually happy? Stanley answered this question by pushing a button. Then he pushed a button, and then he pushed a button. Then he pushed a button. Then he pushed a button.
Okay, so I think that the sort of premise of the game is if you do exactly what you're told, then I'll just click that. Then
Stanley
you
decided
lose.
to go to the staff lounge to check
So
on
you
his
got to do the
chemicals.
opposite of what he says.
He never functioned well by himself and constantly needed support and guidance from others. So the
We'll
thought
go
of
down
total
the
solitude
opposite
was
stairs this
terrifying
time.
to him.
Then we'll call it a
When
day.
Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
So I think it gives you 2 opportunities to do something you're not told.
As Stanley entered the lounge, he was horrified to find not a single person here.
At the
He
start,
decided he would walk up to see his boss,
and then after that
hoping
it's
that he
so
would find
forgiving.
an answer there.
Okay, so you go down.
Coming to a staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office. But Stanley just couldn't do it. He considered the possibility of facing his boss, of admitting that he had left his post during work hours. He might be fired for that. And in such a competitive economy, was it really worth taking that risk? All because he believed everyone had disappeared? His boss would think he was crazy. And then something occurred to Stanley. Maybe, he thought to himself, maybe I am crazy. Everyone I know simply vanishing out of the blue, there's almost no other explanation for it. And a nagging fear began to creep up in his mind. Questions that had been there all along. He just hadn't put his finger on them yet. For example,
Okay.
why couldn't he see his feet when he looked down? Why did doors close automatically behind him wherever he went? And for that matter, these rooms were starting to look pretty familiar. Was he just walking around in circles? Where am I, he thought. And the more he found himself unable to answer these questions, the more questions continued to arise, until he came to the issue that had been slowly boiling, until he could ignore it no longer. Why is there a voice in my head, dictating everything that I'm doing and thinking? Suddenly, every door slammed shut. "No!" Stanley screamed. "I need to get out of here. I need to know that there's something out there. I need to know it's not just all in my head." And he screamed and clutched at his skull as the voice grew harsher and the music in the background rose higher and higher. And then, moments before collapsing to the ground, Stanley clenched his fists and screamed to anyone who might be listening, "I'm not real! I'm not real! Don't believe any of it! None of it's real!" And then everything went black. This is the story of a woman named Mariella.
Oh,
Mariella woke up on a day like any other. She got dressed,
interesting.
went to work, clocked in, clocked out, and then she walked home. But her walk on this day was interrupted by the body of a man who had stumbled through town talking and screaming to himself, and then collapsed dead on the sidewalk. Moments after seeing him, she would turn, run to the nearest police station, and call for an ambulance. But for just a few brief seconds, she merely stood there, unable to move. The tragedy was not the death of a single person. It was that she would never know this man's story, never hear in his own words what had happened to him, or what he believed had happened to him. for to know these things would be to exist inside the head of the man himself. So all she could do was observe from a distance and pity him. But Mariella had places to be and people to meet with, very important people, whose impressions of her would affect her career and indeed the rest of her life. She stood there for only a moment, looking down at the body, and then she ran.
For a mod, this is pretty well written and a lot of narration. Alright, I'm going to call it there, and you can download this on, well, I got it from Destura, so you can just search for the Stanley Parable, and as I said, it's a mod for Half-Life 2, and a very interesting one at that, and I guess we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.